really was the most disastrous thing that happened in my life, really. Consequences of it, as it were. I wrote an article in the Daily Mail. I'd started writing the Daily Mail anyway because whatever reasons, and I wrote an article in end of 2014 saying that general practice wasn't fit for purpose, and I suffered really, really badly for that. But of course, I think everybody would agree that now I was absolutely right. Yeah. So by the end of the week, I had been suspended from the hospital for 2 weeks. My lifetime achievement award I was about to receive, I knew I was about to receive, it was taken away from me. Imperial College took my personal chair away, and it was the most disastrous thing that ever happened to me, all because of saying that general practice is not fit for purpose.
Professor Meirion Thomas is a distinguished former senior cancer surgeon at the Royal Marsden Hospital. His 30-year tenure at the Royal Marsden included groundbreaking work on melanoma and sarcoma, and he has over 97 research papers and 6,214 citations to his name. He's also known for his humanitarian work with refugees, as well as his controversial critiques of the NHS and general practitioners, and of health tourism. So, Professor Thomas, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our discussion. Well, at the Marsden, I treated soft tissue sarcoma, which is a rare tumor. There are about 2,000 in the country every year. And I set up a super regional unit. It was very complex, difficult surgery. The goal was, apart from saving lives, it was to preserve function in the limbs, for example, and to avoid amputation. So I basically picked it up myself, as it were, and that's a silly thing to say because I had no training from it. I just did it from scratch. I was already a competent surgeon anyway when I came into this role. So just developing the sarcoma was one of the most important things I've ever done. With regard to melanoma, nothing to do with me, but the biggest thing was the development of immunotherapy, which was absolutely transformative. Previously, metastatic melanoma was a death sentence. There was nothing virtually you could do. And suddenly, overnight, came this immunotherapy, and lives were sold. I remember walking down the corridor one day, and I'd seen one of my patients dying in the bed, and this guy, two days later, was walking down the corridor towards me. I mean, that's how transformative immunotherapy has been in melanoma.
Right. And that, I suppose, is an expensive therapy, though, is it?
Oh, I'm not as expensive, but it's standard therapy now anyway, all over the world.
You've been one of the most vocal critics of the NHS. You've even called it a broken system or even a dying system. What's been your experience of bringing NHS failings to light within the NHS?
Wow, that's a good question. So I was running this specialist cancer unit at the Royal Marsden Hospital, and in about 2000, I suddenly realized that I was being bothered by health tourists because it was a highly specialist unit, and people were coming to me for treatment from all over the south of England, legitimately. But then amongst them were people who were identified as health tourists. This means people who were not entitled to NHS care, who came into the UK from abroad with a pre-existing illness and claimed free NHS care. And there was a lot of it going on. And I developed a group of people who knew a lot about it. And then I started writing about it. At least I went to my managers, first of all. I said, look, I'm being bothered by health tourists. These people are taking up lots of my operating time, sometimes 2, 3, or 4 hours of operating. And of course, they wouldn't do anything about it because they said if we investigate it, there'll be a delay in treatment and we can be sued for the delay. And then I got a little bit annoyed by their reluctance to investigate it. And I started writing in The Spectator. I wrote 3 articles in The Spectator in 2013 about health tourism, and it took off. And I started calling it our International Health Service, not the National Health Service. That was picked up by Cameron and various other people, and it's been used quite liberally now. But it was my definition originally, an international health service. I went to see Jeremy Hunt, who was the Secretary of State at the time. I actually sat in his office and told him, and he did virtually nothing. And that's the end of health. It's back in the news now, by the way. It's back in the news this last week or so. But I think it's costing the health service about £2 or £3 billion a year.
I mean, you're whistleblowing on health tourism in 2013. I read those articles at the time, and I was quite eye-opening articles. I think you estimated that 5% of your patients at the Royal Marsden were ineligible for free NHS care.
Yeah.
Weren't they meant to be just billed or something so that they would pay a bill at the end of it?
Well, at that time, there was no system for billing them. And the one thing that did happen, there was a system for billing them. But the thing is, Philip, what you have to understand, before you can bill somebody, you've got to identify the fact that they are health tourists and submit a bill. Most of the time, these people are not even identified. Obviously, I was on the lookout for them because I was running a super regional service. And I was a specialist service, and I had a very personal contact with my patients. I knew these people were health tourists. Sorry, I'm digressing there. What I'm trying to say is you've got to identify them as health tourists first before you can bill them. And when you bill them, we know that the vast majority do not pay the bill anyway. They abscond. So the only way to do it is to identify at the beginning. And that's why I was so keen to have identity cards. Identity cards would have solved the problem completely. In France, for example, you have two types of identity cards. You have an identity card for your GP services and a separate one for your hospital services. We have no identity card. We've no idea. Somebody coming to the hospital, we have no idea whether they are entitled to NHS care or not. And that continues to this day, and it's costing us billions.
And you actually refused treatment for one such patient. I think that's what caused the investigation, didn't it?
I don't remember ever refusing treatment. I treated all the patients that I was told to treat by my managers. But there were horrible moments. For example, I remember an Iranian patient coming one day, an obvious health tourist, and I saw him for the second time. And when I went to see him, there were three men in the room. He'd brought two people with him. That's perfectly reasonable. So I walked into the room, walked to my desk, and my patient sat to my side, and the other two sat at the door and stopped me going out. And at that time, the management even said, maybe, would you like some security in your clinic? And I said, obviously no, but that's how desperate these people were. I can understand it. I can tell you vast numbers of stories if you've got time to listen to me, Philip.
Yeah, yes, tell us.
Okay, I'll tell you another interesting one. So one of the problems was British people, citizens living abroad, and have been living abroad for 20, 30 years, having a problem and coming back to the health service. Maybe they still have the same GP and being referred to the hospital for treatment. And obviously, they're very, very difficult to identify because you don't know where they've been for the last 20 or 30 years. But there was one patient I remember very clearly. He was a lecturer in the Far East, and he was brought to the clinic by his mother, and they were quite open about it. And they said, look, he's not entitled to health, or wouldn't be entitled to free healthcare, but he's now coming back to live in the country, and therefore he is, which is true. If you come back to live in the country, you're entitled to free healthcare. So I got to know this guy quite well. And before the operation, I worked out, first of all, that he hadn't given up his job in this faraway country where he was a lecturer in something or other. And he hadn't brought his wife with him, and he still had his family living there. And clearly he had no intention of coming to live back in this country. And I said to him, I challenged him on this. I said, look, I'm going to have to treat you. You can have the operation this week. It's going to take me 5 hours to do it. But I bet you I will never see you again. You will have the operation. Almost certainly you will make an uneventful recovery because we're very good at this sort of work. And I will never see you again. And that's exactly what happened. He didn't say thank you. He just disappeared. And there's so much of it going on, Philip.
Right. You've faced, though, a lot of backlash just for raising this whole issue. What kind of responses have you had? I know you've spoken to various people like Jeremy Hunt, but what was the media response like, and what were your colleagues' responses like?
I think my colleagues are on my side. The backlash I had was when I started writing about general practice, which in 2014. So I was running this clinic, and my patients came from the whole of the south of England, sometimes 200, more than 200 miles away. And I tried to keep the GPs involved. By the way, I should say none of my patients came from GPs. They all came from secondary care. They always came from other hospitals, and they were referred in to me as a tertiary referral.
Yeah.
So I had no contact with the GPs, but I knew their names and addresses, and I was meticulously wrote to them, kept them informed at every stage of the patient journey. And then what my patients told me was that the GPs knew nothing about me. They knew nothing about the operation. They weren't getting any notification from the hospital. Of course they were, and that's when I realized this that even in whenever it was 2000 onwards, GPs did not have named patients. So that when you wrote a letter to the clinic, to the surgery, most times those letters are being uploaded onto the practice computer by the people in the office,
Yeah.
not to be seen by any GP until they attended for the first post-op visit, by which time my patients were better. So essentially, they got no post-op care, and I was appalled at this. Maybe I'm naive. I didn't realize it was happening, and then I wrote my first letter, which really was the most disastrous thing that happened in my life. Really, consequences of it, as it were. I wrote an article in the Daily Mail. I'd started writing the Daily Mail anyway because whatever reasons, and I wrote an article in end of 2014 saying that general practice wasn't fit for purpose, and I suffered really, really badly for that. But of course, I think everybody would agree that now I was absolutely right.
Yeah. So when
General
you
practice
said
is a real
that
mess.
you said the GPs were impersonal and not and it was not fit for purpose.
Yeah.
And when you said you suffered badly for it, what kind of backlash did you have against that?
Well, that paper came out that article came out in the Daily Mail on a Thursday or something like that. And by the weekend, all over the weekend, I've got two sons who are doctors, and they said, "Dad, you're in real trouble. Uh, Online, everybody's really gunning for you." Over the weekend, the GPs collected about 2,000 or more names on a petition to get me struck off by the General Medical Council. My hospital chief executive was very worried about this. Then the professor of general practice in Imperial, his name is Azim Majid. I'm quite happy to name him because it's all in the public domain anyway. He wrote to my chief executive saying, if you don't sort this guy out, we will stop sending patients to the Marsden. And that was this was an absolute financial threat because money follows patients.
Yeah.
So by the end of the week, I had been suspended from the hospital for 2 weeks. My lifetime achievement award I was about to receive, I knew I was about to receive, it was taken away from me. Imperial College took my personal chair away, and it was the most disastrous thing that ever happened to me, all because of saying that general practice is not fit for purpose, which I think most people will think now is right. People can't get appointments to see their GPs. And most of all, they can't get something called continuity of care, which is the thing they most value. In other words, seeing the same GP for multiple visits. So the other thing I was made to get back on staff after my 2-week suspension, I was made to sign a document which said that I would not write in the press again while I was on the staff of the Royal Marsden Hospital, at least that I would actually show anything I wanted to write to my chief executive for her approval before submitting for publication. So obviously I couldn't do that because when you write for newspapers, you get 5 hours to do it. There's no way that I could get that vetted by my chief executive.
Yeah.
So I handed in my notice. I was 69 at the time. I'd worked for 4 years past normal retirement age, on a very, very busy surgical practice, and I gave in my notice and I resigned the following Easter. I wrote my notice. So it's the worst thing that's ever happened to me in the practice, and I feel it was a massively unjust thing to happen. You know, I had a huge track record for service development and research. There was a fire in the Marsden in 2008, if you remember it. Within a few days, I was made lead surgeon, and because of my leadership skills, I suppose, and I led surgery through the recovery from the fire. And yet, nothing mattered. My research didn't matter. My contribution to sarcoma surgery to the hospital didn't matter. It was the reputational damage to the Marsden was all that mattered to the managers.
That's the astonishing thing about this. Once you kind of get a kind of cancellation of some kind or attack in this way, all the good things are completely forgotten.
Yeah.
And
I've written, it's so unjust. It was so unjust. And I have written to them twice now and asking them just to apologize for what happened to me. And each time, on both occasions, I have had no reply.
looking back then, would you still write the letter?
Would I write the article?
Not the
in
letter, so would you still write the article?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
I come from the Welsh valleys. My father was a coal miner. Generations of my families were coal miners. We always sought to do the right thing. Of course, I would do the right thing. And I've gone on from that to talk about other things that are slightly unpalatable, meaning the vast numbers of foreign graduates we bring into this country, foreign doctors we bring into this country. And that's caused a bit of kerfuffle as well, and a lot of rebuttal from the General Medical Council against what I write. That's mainly appeared in the Telegraph, many articles in the Telegraph.
You pointed out that I think we have about 9,000 doctors that we train ourselves.
Yeah.
Something like 19,000 that we import from overseas.
Well, that was in 2024. Yes, we actually imported more than twice the number of doctors that we trained. That's the problem. And the reason it's happened is because I think there's been a cap on training places in medical schools in this country. And I think the cap started because of austerity. It's never been reversed. The cap is about 7,500 medical students. It's gone up slightly. It went up to 9,000, as you said. That's because of 4 medical schools or 5 medical schools that Jeremy Hunt opened. But again, that will plateau again. But the problems, Philip, are the first problem is that there are, during the period I've been writing about, 2018 until the present, when there's been a cap on medical school places, tens of thousands of British students leaving school, aspiring doctors, have failed to get a place in medical school. Tens of thousands of them, yes?
Yeah.
And a complete waste of talent. And the problem with the people coming from abroad is that to get into this country, they take what I call a Mickey Mouse examination called PLAB. They have never lived in this country. They've never worked in this country. And suddenly they've got registration in this country. Now there's no structured training adaptation to start working in the NHS. And I've criticized the fact that there is no preparation or transformation that they receive to be eligible to treat patients in the NHS. And the proof of the pudding is that we know that these foreign graduates are 3 times as likely as British graduates to be referred back to the GMC on fitness to practice grounds. Can I repeat that? These foreign graduates are 3 times as likely as British graduates to be referred back to the GMC on fitness to practice grounds. Now, that is an absolute statement of error in the policy of depending on foreign doctors to man the health service. We should be treating our own doctors.
Didn't the GMC say that they would improve the PLAB and bring it up to the same standard that our own doctors have to have?
What they said for years is that they will abandon PLAB and make all medical students, UK medical students and foreign graduates, take one exam, which is the UK medical licensing assessment, UK MLA.
Yeah.
Which is great. I thought this is great. They'll all take the same exam, but that was meant to happen in 2024, 2025. About a few weeks even before it was meant to kick off, they abandoned it and they've gone back to PLAB.
Why do you think they abandoned it?
Because the thing is, Philip, it's an impossible task for a medical school with, say, 200 or 300 finalists every year doing the UKMLE is a massive task. You have to do vivas, OSCEs. It involves lots of examiners in a room testing these students and doing vivas on them. That's for 200 or 300 finalists in the average UK medical school. How are the GMC going to do that for 19,000 applicants? And they have no academic staff at all. It's obvious that they couldn't do vivas, they couldn't do any interpersonal connection with the student. Interpersonal assessment, I mean. And of course, the point about PLAB is you don't come across an examiner at all. It's all tick box exercising. It's a scandal, Philip. It's an absolute scandal. And I've written about it. I've done as much as I can. I can't do much else. If any of your listeners want to doubt me, just go on the internet and Google fraud in Indian medical schools, fraud in Pakistani medical school, and then it'll be obvious to you. There's all sorts of jiggery pokery getting into medical school and at graduation. And I'm not saying that this is true for all Indian medical schools, but these medical schools, lots of these medical schools, Philip, are private. And that's where the jiggery pokery comes in.
How do we solve the staff shortages then? You know, if we don't.
Well, basically, you've been reading the Times this week, perhaps. So, you know, when a doctor qualifies in this country, they have to do 2 years of foundation training. F1 and F2 is called.
Yeah.
So at the end of F2, they then apply for specialty training. They might have decided what they want to do, or they want to have a kind of general basic specialty, or they want to get general practice, but they apply for specialty training. So this year, the changeover is on August the 6th, which is about to happen. I don't know when your YouTube thing is going out, but on August the 6th, there'll be the switchover from F2 to specialty training. There were 30,000 applicants for 10,000 specialty jobs. Okay? Why? Because the British graduates were applying, but also these vast numbers of international medical graduates that I've spoken to you about were also applying. And the figures quoted in the Times as well was that there are 8,000 F2s finishing their 2-year foundation training on August the 5th, 8,000 of them, and only 4,000 of them have gone specialty jobs to go to. Okay? So basically, what is happening is it's a massive shooting ourselves in the somewhere foot. Yeah?
Yeah.
But there'll be on August the 6th, there'll be 4,000 British graduates who will not have specialty jobs. These people, they'll be 2 years out from qualification. They'll be good doctors. They'll be well trained. They'll have a lot of experience. They'll be very, very, very useful for the NHS, but they won't have any specialty jobs to go to. And, you know, if you want to talk about this 8,700 people on waiting lists, for example, I mean, these people would be invaluable to cope with that backlog of work that's waiting to be done in the NHS. But I don't understand, where is Wes Streeting not seeing all this? Where are the people who run the NHS not seeing this? It's an incredible waste of manpower. Not only letting them into medical school in the first place, but when you let them into medical school, they get to F2, then we don't use them. It's absolute madness, utter, complete madness.
I've heard that junior doctors, as such, people who do go into this specialist training, they're having difficulties at the moment in the way in which they're assigned or allocated places or locations. It used to be that you applied for various things, but now you get allocated. You're going to go to Anglesey, or you're going to go to wherever.
You do get some choice, but you don't get absolute choice. You're absolutely right. So, for example, I know someone I'm in contact with now. She qualified in the London Teaching Hospital. All her family are in the south of England, and she's been posted to Hull. Now, there's absolutely nothing wrong with Hull. I did speak to her, and I said, look, you are going to have a great F1 and F2 training in Hull. There's nothing wrong with Hull. It's a great place. I'm sure the consultants there are keen to teach you and to develop you. But she says, don't want to go to Hull. My family are down here. My medical school is down here. My friends are down here. Why am I being forced to go to Hull?
But the fact that they have very little choice over that, has
No,
that
they do get some choice, but
I think
what
that's only,
happens is
is
that
that only for special circumstances, though, if they've got dependents or some other special case. But
apparently if they're married, that takes into account. But so what happens? They're given 5 choices, and and one of those choices might be, I don't know, north of England or something, and they're banished. And I can tell this girl I'm talking to you about, Philip. Let me just tell you straight away. This girl I'm talking to you is already decided she's going to go to Australia. She
yeah,
said,
yeah.
I gave my life to medicine. I was in the top 10% in my medical school. I couldn't get a job in the south of England where I wanted to be. They forced me to go to Hull. I'm going to leave the NHS as soon as I'm registered.
I've heard a lot of
Can you blame her?
doctors are
I can't
going.
blame her.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of doctors are going to Australia in particular. That seems to be a big magnet for them at the moment.
Philip, I've got the FOI figures from the GMC. Can I give them to you?
Yeah,
Okay. So these are 2024 figures, all right? I said to you that you said to me that we graduated just over 9,200 British graduates.
yeah.
In 2024, got it written down here, so I got it prepared for you. In 2024, okay, to work, once you're registered in any jurisdiction, to apply to work in another jurisdiction, you've got to have what's called a certificate of good standing to confirm that you haven't got any outstanding fitness to practice complaints against you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So before these kids can apply to go to anywhere in the world, including Australia, they have to get a CGS, a certificate of good standing. So in 2024, there were 4,886 certificates of good standing awarded by the GMC. Philip, that's more than half the number of people that qualified. Okay. Now, obviously, they're not the same cohorts because the ones who qualify this year can't apply for CJC until they pass until they get to F1, because you don't register, you get provisional registration and then full registration. So they're different cohorts of people, but nevertheless, the situation is that this year we graduated a maximum number of people, 9,200, and 4,886 of previous UK graduates have applied to work abroad. That's disgraceful. So, I don't understand why doesn't that keep Wes Streeting and his crowd of advisors awake at night?
Yeah.
It's obviously that, and the other things I've told you about, it's obviously going to ruin the NHS.
Is the cause of that merely the fact that we're posting them to different places they don't want to go, or is there some other underlying problem?
Well, not not being happy with the places where they've been posted is brand new, Philip. That's only just start. This has just started this year. Okay.
Right.
So why are they discontented? Because their starting salary is £30,000, for example, as an F1. Yeah. And you've probably got yourself, I don't know, 50 to £100,000 a debt. And there's no accommodation in hospitals anymore. When I was a young doctor, there was absolute accommodation. You lived in the hospital, or you lived in the medical school, or somewhere around. There's no accommodation. So they're posted to a hospital wherever you like in the country, and they've got to find their own accommodation, and all they've got to pay for it is £30,000 a year. That doesn't start you off on a good footing, and you're only going to be there for 2 years anyway. I think they look at the problems in the NHS and they think, I don't want to become part of this. But the other thing in Australia, of course, they are offered these jobs and are welcomed with open arms.
Yeah.
And what have they got? They've got a bigger salary. They've got the adventure of going to work in a different country. They've going to work with sun, sand, sea, and whatever. A wonderful magnet for them. And they go.
Yeah.
The problem that they don't realize, Philip, is that The reason that Australia wants so many of our doctors is that the Australian doctors don't want to do some of these very ordinary jobs like A&E, because most of our guys are going to do A&E, accident emergency, okay?
Yeah.
But what they don't realize is that when at the end of A&E, when they get fed up and they want to get into a specialty, it's much more difficult for them in Australia to get into a specialty training, because of course the Australians are already 2 years ahead of them, because they've just spent 2 years on some lovely seaside resort doing A&E. And also the one thing they've proven is their lack of commitment by leaving the first jurisdiction where they trained in. And when they come back to this country, they're already 2 or 3 years behind anyway. So, what they don't realize is that it's not necessarily a good career move to move to Australia for 2 years to work. It's not necessarily going to help them get on in their medical career, if they want a medical career, that is.
Would more pay sort this out? Because at the moment they're about to go on strike, if they haven't just started strike, for 23% more pay. And I think last year they were given quite a substantial pay increase as well.
Yeah, they were.
Is that the right approach then?
I don't. It's much more than that. It's much more than that, Philip. Wes Streeting has just announced the 10-year plan for the NHS. Yeah.
Mm.
And what the plan says is that the NHS is going to be GP centric.
Yes.
That's the term they've used. So there'll be bigger general practices, and they'll have physiotherapists working there, nurses working there, mental health counselors working there, etc., etc. But that's not going to work, Philip. My last article in the Daily Telegraph was it is going to fail.
Why? Why would it fail?
The so-called it's called the Neighbourhood Health Service. Yeah, it's going to fail. Why it's going to fail is this: because the core skill you're going to require to get it work is good general practice.
Mm.
That's the core skill you need. And you haven't got that. We know that general practice is on its last legs. So what have they said? They're going to employ thousands more GPs. Where are they going to get them from, Philip? The only place they're going to get them from is from abroad.
Yep.
And we know that medical students, they do their GP rotations. They have one look at general practice and they say, I don't want to do general practice. I don't want to train in general practice. We know that. And also we know that 50% of GP trainees are international medical graduates, are the ones I'm talking about, from India, Pakistan, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Egypt. Yeah, they're international medical graduates. And is that what we want, Philip? We don't want that. We want our own people in general practice, because they will have understanding and empathy with the clientele.
Why are they not attracted to general practice? My understanding is that GPs are paid quite a lot of money for the job that they do. I believe the average salary is something over £100,000 a year. Would that not attract sufficient doctors to become GPs?
Yes, and but to go back to they do their general practice rotations, the students, and what they see is this: they see that 58.4% of GPs work 3 days or less.
Yeah,
that was a calculation made by the Health Select Committee in 2022, and it's all written up in the Health Select Committee report. So that's the first thing they see. They see that there's somebody who's here today is not there tomorrow, comes back on Wednesday, and then doesn't come back till following Monday or something like that. They see the fact that patients can't get appointments. They see the fact that there's no continuity of care. I keep coming back to continuity of care. That's one thing I've written about a lot. It's what patients most value. So if you go in to see a GP acutely with some problem, and you're given some treatment or whatever, and you have a test, you should be able to go back and see the same GP the second time or the third time, but it very, very rarely happens unless the GP is absolutely committed. Now, can I just say straight away, there are plenty of GPs who are absolutely committed to the cause, plenty of them, but I suggest the majority are not. And I think that the students see that. They don't want to tell. The other thing is, can I say, Philip, the other thing is training. So to become a hospital consultant, you have to do a minimum of 6 years of training in what I call the craft specialities, which includes surgery, but other things as well, like cardiology and all the, the cardiology, clever things up tubes and plug holes in the heart and also put new valves in, even, right? Those real craft skills take another 2 years or even extra years in the fellowship. So it's a minimum of 6, probably 8, even 10. But to train in general practice, it's 3 years. So, and of those 3 years, 2 years were in general practice. And going back to this neighbourhood health service that Wes is bringing in, you're going to have to expand the training of general practitioners if they're going to take over a lot of the hospital work.
Mm. Yep.
You're going to have to get much more training. They're going to need, I would say, they're going to need to spend at least 3 or 4 years in hospital practice to get the experience that they need to run these GP-centric neighborhood health clinics.
Now, for most practices, you've got to ring up at bang on 8 o'clock in the morning. And if you miss it by 5 or 6 seconds, you're in a queue of 40 or 50 people. And by the time you get through, they say, sorry, all the appointments have gone for the day. Ring up tomorrow. It's like a big filtering system, which stops you from actually having an efficient system to see your doctor when you need to.
Yes, but after that, if you get an appointment, it's likely to be online. Unless you press for it to be, unless your complaint is sufficiently severe to be seen personally. So a huge amount of what happens in general practice goes on virtually now anyway. And that is another terrible, terrible indictment of general practice, because there is a place for virtual consultation. So for example, so Philip goes to the GP the first time and you have a nice consultation face to face, and he says, okay, Philip, I'm going to give you a ring in 2 weeks' time to see how you're getting on. That's fine. And that happens a lot in hospitals now. That's perfectly fine. But what is not right is that Philip rings up and gets a virtual consultation. That's not right. I think your first consultation.
That's because you can miss so many things.
Yes, and we know there's published evidence now. There's evidence for it that virtual consultation leads to misdiagnoses. And is it surprising? Of course, it's not surprising. The first thing that every medical student is taught, that a clinical diagnosis comprises a good history and clinical examination. And then you work out a differential diagnosis and you do some tests and you get a diagnosis. It's what every medical student is taught, but now it's all been taken over by, initially, a lot of the time, not entirely, by a lot of virtual consultation.
Where did it all go wrong, and when did it all go wrong? I'm right to trace this back to the change of contracts that happened. Was it under Tony Blair, when they all got paid quite a lot more money, but they didn't have so many responsibilities and could drop their hours down? Was that when it went wrong, or was there some other problem?
No, that was the beginning of it all. That was Tony Blair. When would that have been? I can't remember. Obviously, end of last century.
Yeah.
And what happened was, I had a friend in general practice, and he said, Meirion, I can't believe what's happening. I can't believe what's happening. I no longer have to do any out of hours work. I no longer have to do any night duty, no weekend duty, no out of hours work. And guess what? They're going to give me more, because they're going to incentivize me to take people's blood pressure regularly and offer some extra services. That was the first thing that happened, because suddenly there was no out of hours emergency cover, which is where the problem was passed on to accident emergency. But that's where it started going wrong. The second thing, the second big thing was COVID. And of course, the only way you could get a consultation during COVID was online, unless you were really, really ill, and then they saw you in an empty surgery, as it were. So and GPs were meant to give up virtual consultation after COVID, but they never did. Why would
No.
they? Why would they? You know, it was very, very convenient for them to do it all virtually.
But as you say, one of the consequences of that was an increasing backlog of patients. Very often, health centres were only looking at COVID patients and everything else was deferred. Even cancer patients were sometimes deferred, I understand. And when we look back at that now, we've got a waiting list of over 7 million people on it,
Mm.
which stems from that time. What do we do about that, and how do we solve that kind of issue?
Oh, well, can I tell you, you said the cancers were deferred. I'm not really sure that's exactly true.
Okay.
There are still things called the 2-week urgent referral pathway. So if a GP really thinks that someone's got cancer, they can be seen very, very quickly. Um, uh, that's true. But do you want to go back to the 7.8 million people, or 7.6, or
Well, I just
7.4,
wondered if you
whatever
have
is
any
coming? Well,
suggestions.
all the cabinet love telling you is coming down by minuscule amounts. But basically, Philip, it's a supply and demand thing, isn't it? Um, the supply is unchanged. We haven't got more new doctors. We haven't got more new hospitals. And the demand is increasing. For example, the population increases by 800,000 a year.
Yeah,
There's an epidemic of obesity,
yeah,
which basically, as far as I'm concerned, obesity is a lifestyle choice.
mm,
It's a very simple equation: calories in, calories out. If you take in more calories than you use, you put on weight. If you use up more calories than you take in, you lose weight. It's simple. It's a lifestyle choice. So,
there's one part of the equation you missed out of that, and that is willpower. And most people don't have any of it.
well, but if it was explained to them, if it was explained to them in as many words that, you know, that obesity, you get above a BMI of 35 and your life expectancy is reduced by 10 years.
Yeah,
You get above 40, your life expectancy is reduced by 15 years. And not only that, but the last 5 years of your existence, you'll be troubled by chronic illness.
yeah,
So we're talking about diabetes. We're talking about all the complications of diabetes, which can be disastrous.
yeah,
Um, we are talking about ruining your joints because of your weight,
yeah,
especially the knees. I know that if you play rugby or whatever you do, or any other sport, wildly in your youth, maybe you can ruin your knee joint. But the reason most people ruin their knee joints is because of overweight.
yeah.
Um,
So the
I
seven
think,
million
sorry.
is the 7 million people on the waiting list, though, need better education.
Well, it's too late, isn't it?
It's too late. Yeah,
Um, well, no, I think they may be on the waiting list for various reasons. For example, they may be waiting on the list for a CT scan or an MR scan or something like that,
yeah,
which comes back to supply and demand. So, for example, the Royal College of Radiologists will tell you that are short of 13,000 consultant radiologists, which is true.
a huge number.
It's a huge, huge number, yes. And so getting you an early CT scan or an MR scan, okay, if that can be achieved, but you've still got to get it reported somehow. What do? I think they outsource them. They outsource them to
Yeah.
other destinations for reporting.
Does artificial intelligence come into this? Well, you just feed your scan into an artificial intelligence machine, and it'll do a better reading than a consultant, or
Well,
not?
Uh, if you talk to the people running the health service and the people planning this tenure plan for the NHS, they will tell you it's going to make a big difference. But for example, with mammograms now, they are a machine reported
Really?
also by a consultant, but also by a consultant. Whether they can do that with complex things like CT scans and MR scans, waits to be seen. I'd be very surprised. And even if they can, what they'll finish up with a long list of abnormalities and a long list of differential diagnoses, whereas an experienced radiologist will look at it and sort it out, look at the past medical history on the records, and come up with maybe a short diagnostic list, or even a diagnosis. So the answer is, I don't think AI will replace it. There may be aspects of reporting that it can help. I don't know. It's too far in the future. And by the time that happens, I probably won't be here, Philip.
You have described the NHS with the terms that it is dying, rather like a patient, I suppose. Is there any solution to it that you can see? If you could wave a wand, or if you had the power of streeting, what changes would you implement,
right,
to try to put it back on its feet again?
I'll tell you what, streeting is going down the same road as Lansley went, and previous governments. They think that the NHS can be changed top to bottom. Yeah?
Yeah.
And I think that's not the way to do it. We've had enough reorganizations of the health service. Thank you very much. We should reorganize the health service from bottom up. In other words, what are the big problems we've got? Let's get them sorted out. So, for example, this 7.8 million that you're talking about, yes? For example, I have written to Wes Streeting several times. He never replies, of course, because I'm just Mr. Nobody. But I have said to him and many other people, start reform of the NHS by reforming general practice. If you can get general practice sorted out, and if you can get general practice, as I've said, I'm going to be murdered for saying this. If they are trained properly, longer in general practice, if they just stop working part-time, and we've got that level of care sorted out, then the pressure on A&E will reduce, and then they can genuinely consider this new thing they're trying to organize, the neighbourhood general practice. I'm getting a bit
One
tired.
thing that you've hinted at in some of your writing is the inclusion of more private practice. Are you still in favour of that? Would that help?
Philip, can I tell you something that they don't seem to understand? I think the people who advocate this think that there is an NHS with consultants, and then a private practice with separate consultants. They're not separate consultants. Yeah. The way private practice works is that the private practice is private operating, for example, is most busy in the evenings and most busy at weekends, when dedicated surgeons are not actually doing their NHS commitment. The only thing that the private sector can offer, in addition to the facilities, is beds and theatre space. So if you're asking me, can we use beds and theatre space in the private sector? The answer is yes. But it's to be the same consultants, almost the same consultants doing the job. Now, that's not entirely true, because there's a lot of private practice around, and in London especially, some NHS consultants have retired early from the NHS and have gone full-time private practice.
Yeah.
And that has happened especially, for example, in orthopedics, where there's a huge amount of work, and in gynecology, obstetrics, well, not in obstetrics, in gynecology, where there's a huge amount of work. So if Philip has got a wonky hip and he can't wait for it to be done, he can probably find £15,000 to get his hip done privately. Yeah. And get past the waiting list. So where people are going private is in well-defined illnesses which have got one treatment, and it doesn't drag on. So you can't do that for cancer, for example, because you never know what's going to happen in the future, and you might need lots of different sorts of treatment.
Can I move on to something different? Can I ask you about your humanitarian work? Because I'm told in 2017 you worked with the David Nott Foundation
Well,
to treat Rohingya refugees.
okay,
Um,
I don't want to, let's stop there, Philip. I don't want to exaggerate what I've done in terms of humanitarian um, stuff. David Nott is a very good friend of mine. I was his best man, but David Nott is unique. Absolutely unique, you know. I mean, for example, even now he's just come back from the West Bank in Israel, and before that he was in Kiev. David Nott is unique. I have done nothing, nothing to be compared to compare with what David has done. The only thing I did go with him on one trip to operate on the Rohingyas in Bangladesh. That was an amazing experience for me, and that was the only exposure I've had with David. So I don't want my contribution to be compared in any way to the enormous amount of contribution that David has done, for which he has not been well rewarded, by the way. I don't mean financially, I mean in terms of respect
yeah,
by, by the nation.
but tell me, how did it influence your own personal perspective then on global healthcare disparities?
Well, I worked in Uganda for a year. You probably haven't picked that up.
No, I hadn't.
But when I qualified, I did in those days you just did one house job, 1 year of house jobs, and immediately I went to Uganda for a year. And I went to Uganda in 1970. That's how old I am. And I spent a year there. I was there for the whole of Amin's coup, for example. I remember the day of Amin's coup extremely well. I lived there during the terrors of Amin. Um, I By then I was working in an upcountry hospital called Masaka, and uh, um, it was the most amazing year of my life because I finished up in this hospital, and believe it or not, there was a surgeon there with his FRCS. There was a physician, an Asian physician with his MRCP, and a gynecologist with his MRCOG. They all had British postgraduate qualifications. And I was the only young guy there working there. And they taught me so well and so thoroughly. And I kept in touch with the gynecologist I worked with because I did most of my work was obstetrics. But I owe an enormous debt of gratitude to the Asian physician who I lost touch with, because he used to take me on ward rounds with him twice a week. And I saw rheumatic fever was endemic, for example. And every heart valve disease you could ever think of, every tropical disease you could ever think of. And I came back and I actually took the MRCP, which is specialist qualification in medicine. I didn't do any work. I just went in because I'd seen it all. I'd seen it all, you know? And
Yeah,
so in fact, I've always maintained my relationship with Uganda. And if I can just say something, yeah, my wife and I, we went back there in 2017. I didn't travel very much when I was in Uganda because, first of all, I didn't have any money. But secondly, I couldn't leave my town because of Amin's coup. I still got my curfew pass. You were not allowed to leave where you were. So I couldn't travel. Eventually, I got across the border to get out of the country, eventually, because I'd been there a year and that was enough. Um, but we went back in 2017 and we did a tour right around Uganda, finished up at a hospital called Buwindi Hospital. And um, my wife and I did a tour around the hospital. As soon as she arrived, she was dragged off by one of the nurses to look at or to do an ultrasound on a patient who had just been admitted. They could see the mass on the ultrasound. They didn't know what it was. That's another story. But I was left with this senior nurse who had looked after me and showed me the hospital. So this girl was so impressive. She was a Ugandan nurse. She was so impressive. And I've always been fascinated and interested in HIV because when I was in Uganda in 1970-71, of course, there was this wasting disease, which was rampant. And of course, we didn't recognize it. Nobody knew what it was. It was, of course, HIV.
uh,
And I've kept in touch with the disease ever since. And I was chatting to this girl about the problems of of treating HIV or AIDS in that sort of setting, in a very primitive setting. She was so clever. She was so intelligent. I said to her, after 20 minutes, Philip, I said, why aren't you a doctor? And she said, I've got the grades, but I can't get into medical school. Sorry, I've got the grades, but I can't afford to go to medical school.
Yeah.
And immediately I said to her, you get a place in medical schools and I'll put you through medical school.
Wow.
And by this time, my wife had walked back to where I was standing with her. I told her what I'd done. And immediately the girl, her name is Shamira, she said, I can't accept the offer. Eleanor, can you get me Shamira's picture, please, from the wall? So immediately, Shamira said, I can't accept your offer because my salary keeps my mother and my two young sisters.
Yeah.
So my wife said, we will pay that as well.
Gosh.
So can you see that, Philip?
Wow.
Can you see this?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's Shamira. She qualified last year.
That's brilliant. Brilliant.
And can I tell you, before you send me a medal, I think that the total cost to us was about £30,000,
Right.
which we can well afford. And but the point is, all this money that's wasted on overseas aid, we have created a very dedicated doctor in Uganda. Yeah,
Yeah.
I know she will. And we're in close touch with her. In fact, she was 4 months into the job, and she sent me a video of her doing a cesarean section. Now, in this country, you'd be on year 4 of your training before you're allowed to do a cesarean section. She was 3 or 4 months. And it ended with this photograph of this baby on the mother's tummy. It was just so wonderful to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something to be very proud of, I think. But
my wife is shouting at me now. She's just been transferred back to the main teaching hospital in Uganda, which is Malago Hospital, Makerere University.
right.
So that's probably one of the things I've done, which I'm most proud of, Philip.
Yes, and quite rightly so, I would think. We're coming to the end of our time together, but I've got one last question to ask you, if I may, and that is to do with young doctors, rather like the girl you've just shown me, and that is for all those aspiring surgeons now who wish to follow in your footsteps and make a contribution in this way to society. What advice would you have for them today in navigating a career in medicine, especially when things are so difficult at the moment?
Well, I would say, first of all, it's got to be one of the most rewarding careers. For the whole of my life, I worked in the NHS for 45 years. I used to get out of bed and look forward so much to going to work. Nothing could depress me. I was so happy, and I had a fabulous team of people. A tremendous satisfaction is what I would say to them. It's the most rewarding and satisfying job. And don't be put off if that's assuming you can get into medical school, which the government is trying to stop you getting into medical school because they've got the cap on medical school training places. But assuming you can get one to medical school, don't give up. Just overcome all the difficulties. Don't go to Australia. Stick in the NHS, and you will find someone who will energize you and will take you on board and support you and work you through all the difficulties. So that's the message. I still encourage everybody to go into medicine. Every young person I see. In fact, I remember one of my boys said, "Dad, not everybody in the world can go into medicine, you know." Anyway,
No. Professor Meirion
good enough answer?
Thomas, thank you very much indeed for your time and for sharing your experience with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.